So I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. In terms of the format, so we'll start with a round of introductions in just a moment. And then Cary and I will just have a really robust conversation around her experience expanding her school. It will be a Q&A session. And then we'll close out that discussion and kind of turn it over to you all as the attendees. So we'll use the final 10 or so minutes to take your questions. So as we're going through this, if a question arises for you, you can submit that question at any point in the Q&A box. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with introductions. So I'll say a word about myself and then I'll hand it over to Cary. So my name is Kathryn Koerner, and I serve as the SchoolWorks Director of School Design and Renewal. And I have been with SchoolWorks for going on 13 years now, so it's been a minute. And for those of you who don't know, SchoolWorks is an education consulting company that is based in Massachusetts. Although we do work all across the country. So, and even in the past have done some international work. We work with a really broad range of educational organizations, so schools, districts, networks, state departments, associations, and we do all of that work in service of improved student outcomes. Similar to our work, the people who work for SchoolWorks also are located all across the country. So I myself live in Richmond, Virginia. And in this role, I had the opportunity back in 2023, I keep reflecting on, I can't believe it's been 2 years, to work with Cary during her school's first renewal. So we worked together on her school renewal application. And then simultaneous to that, we worked together, collaborated closely on putting together her school's expansion application. And so when the topic around school expansion was broached as a webinar topic, I immediately thought of Cary to talk through her experience, because she approached expansion so thoughtfully and strategically and was successful in doing it. And so I know that we'll have a really rich conversation today about that. So with that, Cary, I'll turn it over to you if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yes, thanks, Kathryn. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Cary Finnegan, founder and head of school at Brooklyn Rise Charter School, just a small independent public charter school here in Brooklyn, New York. Started off my career as a teacher in Hartford, Connecticut, which is also where I'm from. Before moving to the city, I had to get my master's in education policy, but I missed the classroom, went back to the classroom for a number of years before working as a curriculum consultant, and in my work in that role, training teachers in literacy curriculum, kind of came across the Sunset Park community, which inspired me to apply to the Building Excellence Schools Fellowship to learn how to open a charter school, and applied to open Brooklyn Rise. I guess we were chartered in 2018, opened our doors in 2019, which is, of course, the year of the pandemic. So a very challenging year to open a new school. But to Kathryn's point, our 5-year charter was just for, a K through 5 elementary school. Initially, that is just what I thought we were going to do. But last year, and after, I know we'll talk more about it, but after a number of different reflections and stakeholder input, did end up deciding to, when we went through the renewal process, also expand. So we're currently a K through 6 school, growing to be K through 8. And yeah, excited to talk more about Rise and kind of the decision and our experience with expansion today.
Thanks, Cary.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive in and kind of build on the context that you just shared in your introduction. So for the folks who aren't familiar with your school, you gave a little bit of an overview, but if you wouldn't mind talking us, giving some context building with some more detail about Brooklyn Rise. So things like the mission, the model, who you serve, and then of course, how, equity is just at the forefront of everything that you do as a school.
Yeah. So I'm definitely not entrepreneurial by nature. So when I thought about starting, I never thought that I was going to start a school, but my work in the Sunset Park community in Brooklyn, at the time, the elementary schools were very overcrowded, quite large. So I live in that neighborhood now. I'm across the street from an elementary school that at one point had 1,700 students, K-5. And also for folks not familiar with Sunset Park, it is like a historically immigrant community. And so kind of one part of Sunset Park predominantly serves students who are Hispanic, Latinx identifying. And then another part of Sunset Park is called like the Brooklyn Chinatown and serves a lot of Chinese immigrant families. And so what you saw in elementary schools in Sunset Park that were zoned by zip code and neighborhood was that there was a lot of kind of separation amongst those communities. And I just thought, both because the schools were so large, and I love the idea of having kind of an inclusive school that could go across different zip codes in the neighborhood, that was kind of the idea of Brooklyn Rise was born, to just be a small school option for students. There were also at the time no charter school options for families. And so that is what got me excited about starting Rise. So we're small, just 2 classes at every grade level, 26 kiddos in each classroom. We do the 2-teacher model in all classrooms, K through 5. And we also really wanted to be a school that served the community that we were entering. And so we also give preference in our lottery to students whose home language is other than English. So about 75% of our families, English isn't the first language spoken. 40% of our kiddos receive multilingual learner services. We also give preference in our lottery to students who qualify for free and reduced price lunch. So that makes up about 85% to 90%, depending on the year, of our student population. And because we're a small kind of inclusive school that really focuses on student intervention and support for diverse learners, we have about 25% of our students have IEPs and receive special education services. And so that was kind of again, the original intent for Rise was just to be this small school option for families in the Sunset Park community. But of course, here in New York, charter schools are open enrollment. So students, from all different zip codes can apply, but we do predominantly serve students in that Sunset Park neighborhood that we designed our school for.
Thank you, Cary.
Yeah.
Kind of continuing along with just context building for people who are unfamiliar with where you operate, the political landscape in New York. Can you talk us through how you would characterize the climate towards kind of charters in general, and then more specifically towards expansion?
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I think, we have some benefits here in New York for sure, just around like funding and like the kind of the charter law initially. However, I would definitely say overall, it's like a challenging landscape politically here in the city. The year that my school received the charter, we were at the very end of the total number of charters that New York City had allowed under the charter law. So we had kind of hit the cap, so to speak. So I was kind of part of the last cohort of schools to receive charters. And then specifically in Sunset Park, the neighborhood where we were founding, like I said, there were no charter schools. So there was obviously an understandable kind of curiosity and sometimes concerns around charter schools. There was a sense of like, is this part of gentrification, which the Sunset Park community and Brooklyn neighborhoods in general, have experienced a lot of over time, which was another reason why we developed an enrollment policy that really was protective to ensure that our school continued to serve the population that we were intended to serve, right? Students whose home language is other than English and students who qualify for free and reduced price lunch, because having those enrollment policies kind of helps you protect your student population. But yeah, in general, I would just say that there's just a lot. I think here in New York City, we have a lot of larger charter management organizations and that have expanded quite rapidly in certain communities. So specifically, if you look at Harlem, there was like a lot, kind of like a huge bust of or boom of charter schools kind of all around the same time. And that ended up having like a really significant negative impact on traditional public school enrollments. And so I just think there's a lot of those things that have happened here in the city that make neighborhoods and communities understandably a little bit cautious and concerned. But again, we're just, small independent charter school. And so I think sometimes it's like both trying to collaborate and align ourselves with the charter school movement, but also make clear that there are differences in different charter schools and kind of what they set out to do, and that our school really did set out specifically with kind of the Sunset Park community in mind and meeting some of the needs that were there. So.
Thank you for that. And I'm reflecting when we were working on your expansion requests, we had so many conversations where it was like, gosh, is this going to get approved? And we were really, you were, really quite prepared for, the distinct possibility of it not getting approved because of, the climate that you just described.
Yeah.
So, I suspect that there might be some folks here who are considering expansion who might be like in similar
Yeah.
situations where the climate, maybe for different reasons, is a little tough. And so, can maybe take a glimmer from you where you were able to successfully expand despite kind of those challenges that the climate presented.
Yeah, and I should add to your point, like specifically, there was a lot of anti-charter expansion climate because once we hit the cap, the kind of anti-charter folks believed that expansion was a way of getting around the cap, right? So rather than applying for another separate charter for a middle
Mhm.
school by expanding to become a K through 8, they felt like that was, a way to kind of circumvent the charter cap. And so there was like specific kind of anti-expansion efforts being made along that lens. And so it was, of course, just really important for us to provide a lot of rationale for why this
Mhm.
really truly is an expansion. It's not a separate school, community, and all of that.
Great. Okay, so now that we kind of have the context of
Yeah.
your school, kind of the market in which you're operating, let's learn a little bit more about you. So, kind of your road to founding Brooklyn Rise. You kind of in your introduction gave some key highlights, but if you could expound on your background and then your founding journey.
Yeah. So, I'm a product of like the traditional public school system in Connecticut where I grew up. And when I first started teaching, I was teaching in the traditional public school system in Hartford, Connecticut. And so I didn't actually know much about kind of charter schools and all of that. I think I watched the movie like Waiting for Superman at some point, and that kind of like
Hmm.
introduced me to the concept because charter schools weren't really very present in where I grew up. When I moved to New York, and again, I thought I was going to go the education policy route. I was working a job that was kind of more of a cubicle type job, and I realized quickly that was not for me, and I missed being in the classroom. And that was I didn't have certification though here in the city, and that was what led me kind of into the charter space. I started working at Democracy Prep Public Schools in East Harlem, and that was kind of my first foray into the charter world. That charter network actually was also founded by someone who went through the Building Excellent Schools Fellowship. And so I just kind of, that was my first experience of like these different worlds of like traditional public school versus charter schools. And then I continued to kind of work at some larger charter management organizations, both here in New York, also in Boston. And essentially what ended up happening for me just like as an educator is that I was having a hard time finding a school that felt like the right fit to me. I like learned so much and I grew so much as an educator in each of the schools that I worked in. But also there were some philosophical differences in terms of like how I felt like schools were not always committed to supporting diverse learners in those spaces. And it was kind of like, if this child isn't working in this school, then they need to go find a different, like this just might not be the right fit for them versus creating an educational environment that was really supportive of diverse learners specifically, which was really important to me. And then also just like approaches to like discipline and kind of the way that we kind of build student capacity around just like being part of communities and participating in those in positive ways. So all this to say that for a while, I kind of, after working in the charter world for some time here in the city, kind of took a step back because I wasn't sure I was going to find the right fit for me. And when I came back to Brooklyn, I was like, I want to stay here a long time, for a long term, put my roots down, grow my family here. That's when I was working as like kind of the curriculum work. And I found the traditional public school that I was working at in Sunset Park that then led me into thinking, oh, I remember this Building Excellent Schools Fellowship. I was kind of aware of it. And I really liked this idea of getting an entire year to kind of study schools across the country, as well as working in a cohort model of other folks who are doing school founding because it is such like unique and challenging work. And so the fellowship really afforded me that year of time to like both learn how to write a charter, study other schools, really refine what I wanted Rise to be. And then I actually applied to one authorizer first and was rejected. We applied to the SUNY. We have kind of three authorizers here in the student, but primarily SUNY and NYSED. And I then applied again and I applied to NYSED and I was given the charter there for our school. And that was kind of when the journey began. So in 2018,
Wonderful.
2019, yeah.
Awesome. So, now, kind of continuing this conversation, if you could just walk us through those first years of operation, you got authorized, you had built your school, like you said. How was it during those first years of operation? And then how did the thought of expansion come to be? How did it germinate?
Yes. Yeah. So transparently, because I had worked at some charter schools that had expanded so quickly and I had seen kind of how that had created some kind of negative impacts, I was like very sure. I was like, I'm just going to create one small, beautiful elementary school in the Sunset Park community, and that's all I'm going to do. So when we opened in 2019 with kindergarten and first grade, I tell people all the time, it was like opening the school of my dreams from like, it was very hard. Facilities here in the city is like, that's a whole other webinar, but facilities are challenging. We had found a facility we'd opened in this kind of like 10,000 square foot space that was like above a Rite Aid and below a senior center, on the corner of this like very kind of thoroughfare block in Sunset Park. And it was just perfect in so many ways. But then, of course, COVID hit in March and we had to shut down our school. And then the following year, figuring out how to do remote school for the first time. We're all very familiar with Zoom now, but at the time it was like all new. And
Mm-hmm.
getting 5 and 6 year olds to be engaged in Zoom was like a whole other thing. So I would really characterize our first couple of years and really first few years as kind of survival mode, because then we were figuring out year two for us was the year of like some kiddos are fully remote, some are hybrid, some are in person. And it really wasn't until year three that I felt like, okay, we're back to fully in-person school. But at that point, we did actually run into a space issue. So again, this little 10,000 square foot space we were in was no longer going to suffice as we continued to grow and expand. And that actually forced us to relocate to the location we're in now in downtown Brooklyn, which is 4 miles away from our intended neighborhood of Sunset Park, where we kind of designed our school for that community. Luckily, 85% of our families stayed with us, and we went from one school bus to 7 school buses, and we've really made it work. And we're working to get back to Sunset Park and a new building there. But I share all that to say that like there was a lot going on with just trying to figure out how to establish our elementary program and like kind of getting out of survival mode and kind of making sure our school was growing and honoring the mission and the vision that we set out to achieve in our charter. So initially, I wasn't really thinking about expansion, but truthfully, our families were the ones that really started
Mm-hmm.
coming to us and saying, we would really love for you to expand to middle school. We really want to keep our kiddos at Rise through eighth grade. So then I started looking into it because, again, I never wanted to open something where there wasn't like a need for it. But again, looking into the middle schools locally, like the options that families have, and also, again, the size of the schools, the distance. So here in New York, it's open enrollment for middle school. So you don't necessarily end up at a middle school that's local to where you live. You could end up in a middle school anywhere, depending on where you ranked and where you get placed. And so it's just a very overwhelming process for families. And of course, for kiddos to have to change schools. And then they also then have to
Mm-hmm.
go to new high school. So it's like new kids all the time. And we serve a lot of diverse learners who benefit from, structure, routine, stability, predictability. And so I really, after talking to families, became much more open to the idea of considering expansion. And so it was probably around year four as we were kind of heading into preparing for our what was going to be our renewal year. We had to kind of make a decision about it. We of course surveyed families and in conversations with the board, because of course the board had to be supportive of the decision as well. We kind of all collectively decided, you know what, let's expand. And that was kind of how we got there, but it was not originally intended, but I'm happy to be here now. So.
Um, I remember you always characterize yourself as like the reluctant
Yeah,
entrepreneur, the reluctant
exactly.
expander, but you're like, I don't have a choice. My family's want it so bad. So yeah, so kind of like let's marry all of this together and really
Yeah.
get into like the meat of expansion here. And so if you could kind of just talk us through, you can see this is kind of a
Yeah.
more robust kind of a question here.
Yeah.
um just how your experiences, prior to founding, you had a really diverse set of experiences prior to founding. During founding, you talked about, you opened your year and then COVID hit and finding your footing, and then of course this kind of drumbeat from your families wanting you to expand. So how did all of that kind of come together to shape your approach to expansion? Thinking about like, when was that moment that you were just like, okay, I have to do this? And then, were there any non-negotiables that just needed to be true for you? And then, risks and challenges from your point of view.
Yeah. So I spoke about this a little before, but again, I think working at some charter networks that I had seen going through kind of major expansions had made me feel reluctant about the idea of expansion, just because I saw that like as you expand quickly, sometimes like your mission and vision can get diluted or lost in some way, or you just experience, some maybe unforeseen challenges that come with, big expansion plans. I also felt really strongly that the original intent of the charter movement was like to provide neighborhoods and communities with something that is not currently there, like meeting a need. And so I definitely didn't want to expand just for expansion's sake. Like I don't need to see Brooklyn Rise buildings all over the place. Like that's not, it was really like, is there a need? And is this something that we can do responsibly while still meeting the mission and vision of our school, which again, we don't take lightly because the whole school was designed to serve diverse learners and to be an environment that can really support a variety of needs. And so my fear with expanding was like, can we still do that even as we grow? And I didn't want to, again, even though families were very invested, and I like, I love partnering with families is a huge part of what we believe in here. I didn't want to do it just because of the pressure from families. I also wanted to make sure that it was something that we could do well.
Mhm.
So again, it was kind of like identifying, making sure there really was a need for more middle school seats, talking to families, and also just looking at like what would our kind of org chart and structure, how would that change? I specifically here at Rise, we have something called we have an inclusive learning department, right? And in that we have our special education coordinators, our multilingual learner coordinators, we have our social work team, we have like a separate kind of student culture support team as well. And I knew what our org chart looked like for K-5, but it was like, what does this look like if we're kind of this department in particular, how is that going to work budgetarily? And so once I was able to kind of work with the board and also our back office provider who helps us kind of do long-term budgeting,
Mhm.
once we were able to kind of ascertain that we could kind of continue to provide the same kind of support, like robust supports to our students, even as we grew, that, definitely made us feel like, okay, like that's something we can move forward with. I also, even though expansion made me nervous, transparently, the experiences of like our first 3 years of operation, like we went through so much. And I felt like even through all that, we were really able to honor the mission and vision of Rise and build a really beautiful school community. So that did give me some level of confidence that even though expansion might come with its own challenges, like I did feel like that was something that we could take on and still stay true to what makes Rise Rise. But yeah, I would say that that was like, and then I think just some of the political pushback I was worried about. I just wasn't sure we were going to be given
Mhm.
the granted expansion just because I knew that there had been some schools recently who had been rejected their request to expand. You obviously have to prove that the school you are currently operating is in good standing in all ways.
Mhm.
If they're going to give you extra seats. And we had some challenges, like overall, again, I think we did really well, but the facility, the move, there were some things that I was worried the authorizer might see as like not quite stable. So again, my plug for working with SchoolWorks was really helpful just because going through that process of coming up with a narrative and really looking at like, okay, where can we really highlight all the things that have gone really well
Mhm.
and we believe we'll be able to continue doing well in the future.
Thank you. Um, Okay, so yeah, so you were approved, obviously, which is why you're here
Yes.
talking about it.
Yeah.
And I'm reflecting back on the timing. So we submitted those applications in August of 2023, and then if I'm not mistaken, you got your decision just about a year ago, right? It was at the
Yeah,
close
June
of that
10th. June 10th.
2023-24 school year. And then this past school year, you served your first class of sixth grade. So
Mhm.
you essentially had mere months, right,
Yeah.
between the approval and then the start of the inaugural sixth grade class to prepare.
Yeah.
So, that's a fast timeline.
Yeah.
So, talk us through like kind of that timeline, like what it's challenging, obviously, but were
Yeah.
there as well as going through that first year of serving your sixth graders, which your school year is now coming to a close.
Yeah.
But what are the biggest challenges that you encountered? How did you problem solve? I'm
Mhm.
also wondering if anything just like especially surprised you. Did anything just like, whoa, that came out of left field. I wasn't expecting that. Like, and then just an overall characterization of how things have gone.
Yeah. So we were not expecting to not hear until June 10th. I think what's really hard is like And I understand the authorizer has a lot on their plate in terms of all the renewals and expansion requests and whatnot, but there really was no kind of guarantee of when we would find out. But we definitely didn't think it was going to be so like into June. We thought we would know sooner. I'd say one of the biggest challenging aspects of it, or the most challenging, was hiring, like thinking about, I can't wait to hire until we find out a decision, but it's
Mhm.
also it's a little bit difficult to ask a teacher, okay, you might be a fifth grade teacher, but you might be a fifth and sixth grade teacher. And so that was how I approached hiring, though, is I was very transparent. I was like, you technically are interviewing for a fifth grade job, but you also need to be open to the possibility that it would be a fifth, sixth, you teach both cohorts. And so that was just figuring that structure out. I'm like, what does it look like if we don't get the expansion? Like what is our kind of org chart? And then what does our org chart look like if we do get the expansion? But trying to move that hiring process along so that we didn't have to do it just all at the last minute. So that was one of the challenges. I would also say just for our families, because they don't know, right? Are you going to have a middle school or not? And so our fifth graders last year, we had encouraged our families throughout the entire year, please continue to apply, even if you want your child to stay at Rise. We want to make sure your child has a middle school next year that they're excited to go to. So we also had really been working with families throughout the school year, understanding their middle school options and what would be plan A, what would be plan B. And so I think that was like hiring and then that aspect of it. I will say that what ended up happening, because we didn't find out until June 10th, there were a number of students who I think would have stayed at Rise if we had known sooner, but because it took us so long to find out, they did end up deciding to go with kind of the middle school, their other middle school choice. So that was like an enrollment hit. We went from, we basically cut our sixth grade class in half. And it's hard. We didn't have time. We weren't recruiting for that class because we didn't know if we were going to have that class. So all that to say that this year it's been a little bit strange because that cohort now is so much smaller than they were originally. But at the same token, what's nice about it is that because we are kind of figuring things out and expanding, it helps us do it with like a smaller group of kids, which is nice, takes a little bit of some pressure off, and allows us to, again, really partner with families because there's, smaller cohort. Um, and so I would say that those, those were kind of two of the biggest challenges. I also, as you know, I also had a baby in July, so I kind of had like a month before I had my third child. I
Just
had
a minor challenge.
yes, exactly. So I was like, I would say like I had my first son the week before we received our first charter. My second son was when we moved to downtown Brooklyn, and then my daughter was born, a month after we found out we were expanding. So that was really just hard for me personally, was not being here to kind of oversee the kind of launch.
Mhm.
We thought about postponing, like you can take a planning year. Once we were granted expansion, we could have waited a year to actually expand. And we really, the board, my leadership team, we were back and forth on it, but it just felt so hard because it was really this founding family, right? Our founding cohort of families that had been
Mhm.
kind of asking for this. And we really wanted to honor that because we did all this work in part because we wanted to continue to serve their children. So we did end up moving forward, even though it was kind of like with a smaller cohort and there were going to be some challenges. But in the end, I feel like, it's gone well and we've learned a lot. I'm really excited for kind of next year and all at this point of the year, we're doing a lot of planning. But overall, I do think we really honored kind of the partnership with families in a really beautiful way. And it's been great. I don't want to now thinking about losing them when they graduate eighth grade is so hard because I'm so happy that we've gotten to continue to work with them because these oldest kids, they were our kindergartners and first
Yeah.
graders when we first opened. So
Wow, that's crazy to think about, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so as we come to a close to our Q&A, and so that way we can open it up to any questions that the attendees have, I'll leave it here. Like, what advice do you have for those considering expansion? And as the poll indicated, we do have someone who is in the midst of an expansion, and then a few who are kind of
Yeah.
considering embarking on that.
Yeah, I think again, really looking like consulting families and making sure that there is like kind of like a shared desire to continue to kind of like build the community. If it is just kind of one, school community. And then I think if you're trying to expand to like more schools and locations, just again, really making sure there is a need there that needs to be met. considering enrollment, doing all the community engagement pieces to really understand what families in those neighborhoods and communities are looking for, and does the model of your school serve that? And then just making sure that as you grow, you can still continue to honor those promises and commitments that are in your charter, and are laid out in the mission and vision of the school. Because again, like expansion can kind of challenge those things. And so like for us, again, our commitment to the diverse learners that we serve, like how do we first and foremost need to make sure that if we do expand, that we can continue to honor that aspect of our school. And then, yeah, I think just like the political landscape and facilities and thinking about all of that and just try to best position yourselves. It was like, again, another reason we decided to partner with SchoolWorks is because we knew it was like a difficult political climate. And we were like, we want to put ourselves in the best position of working with folks who know kind of have gone through this process before, because for us it was our first time and we're just this small independent school. So I think finding those partners that can also help you consider and like do those things thoughtfully is also helpful.
Thank you. I'm just like reflecting on us, like you said, thinking about how to best position your case. And you already had, I mean, so much in your favor. Your school was is so high performing. You're serving that group, your diverse learners so incredibly well. And then of course you had significant parent demand. And then, also in thinking about what really resonated with me was the things that you said that just had to be true. Like you had to make sure that you could still be faithful to your mission, to your model, making sure that the org chart works. Those are, like you said, you have your inclusive team and you needed to make sure that that would still work from a financial and operational point of view in order to serve your kids. And then also what really resonated with me was how much you took into account feedback that you had gotten from NYSED and really course corrected based on that feedback, and to really position that narrative where, obviously you were granted that expansion. So, okay. Well, Cary, thank you so much for sharing. We are going to open this up now in our final moments here to our last 10 or so minutes here to the attendees. So we do have quite a few questions. So one of the questions that was presented was, can you give some concrete examples of how you center equity in the day-to-day management of Brooklyn Rise or its academic program?
Yeah. I mean, a few things. Again, we serve a very like language diverse population of students and families. And so I think one thing that I'm kind of more on the operational side, but just generally with hiring, we always are trying to think about like as we're staffing our school, how do we ensure that families that we serve have language access? That's something that we hear from families a lot, is they want to be able to kind of communicate comfortably with the school that their child is in. And so we really take that a lot into consideration in terms of language access. Also, definitely because we serve, so many students who do have IEPs and receive those related services. So one thing that we work really hard on, because we provide ICT classrooms in-house, social work counseling is an in-house provided service, but we have to outsource things like speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. Also, so really getting strong partnerships with related service providers, especially since some of our kiddos need those services in their home language, and they have those bilingual, which can be even harder, resources to find. So I think, again, really investing school resources in our inclusive learning department was like a huge way that we could make sure that we were maintaining our kind of commitment to equity and the mission of our school, which is, again, to serve diverse learners. Also, just, again, hiring, making sure we have enough special education certified teachers who really do have the certification and the experience to meet the needs, right? We don't want to say we're a school that serves diverse learners, but not have the kind of staffing and resources in place to support that. And that's also been something that the board has been like incredibly supportive about, is like they really understand that like based on the numbers and the students that we serve, making sure that like those resources are being allocated appropriately to kind of support those students. And again, before we decided to expand, we had to look and see, can we continue to do that? And many of you on this call know this, but it's like, funding can change as students' needs, especially with IEPs. As kiddos are getting older, if things are going well and they're developing, they don't also often need quite as many services and supports, which then can reduce the kind of additional funding that you have, but they do still have, needs unique needs. And so we wanted to make sure that we were, positioned financially to have the resources and the staffing in place to meet, all the needs of our kiddos.
That's a great segue actually to this next question that someone has put into the Q&A box. So this is talking about, in reference to the fact that, unfortunately the decision came a little bit later. And so you would, reference that some of your families had already kind of elected to, move on to a different middle school. And so the question specifically is, you mentioned capturing about 50% of your fifth graders for the new sixth grade. What did that mean for your budget projections? Kind of how did you cope with that? How did you make that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. Transparently, this year we're ending with the deficit, which is hard. It's only our second year that's ever been the case for our school. Like, so in general, I feel like we've been, fiscally very strong, which again has allowed us to have some savings in place, which can help us withstand a tough year. So our other kind of challenging year financially was the year we relocated to downtown Brooklyn, because even though we kept 85% of our families, we did lose. Also, we were, in a new neighborhood, and we had to kind of get ourselves established in this community and get our name out here. So that was another year that kind of enrollment, as well as just like the cost of relocating, had impacted us financially. So this year we are going to be operating at a deficit because of that unexpected drop that happened kind of at the end of last year. And we, but we are able to withstand it because we did have enough reserves. And next year we're just planning, and, we're going to kind of rebuild where we lost enrollment, right? We're backfilling kiddos. And this year when we were doing recruitment and enrollment, we were able to say we're a K through 7 school, right? Last year we couldn't say that because we didn't know if we were going to be K through 6. But now that we know, we can tell families we are a K through 8. So all of that really helps kind of rebound enrollment, which is good.
Okay. This next question is, I think, extrapolating on your approach to hiring. Obviously, the timing of the decision, like you said, posed a number of challenges. And so this question is, did you hire a whole new sixth grade team? Kind of how did, you talked about kind of you had to be really transparent with people in hiring. Kind of talk to us more about the outcome of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're a small school, so admittedly, like, I think we're able to be a little bit more like flexible in some of these pivot moments. I definitely want to say that I know that some folks have much larger contexts. But for us, what I would say is the biggest challenge is that though we hired fifth grade teachers with the knowledge of like you might become a fifth and sixth grade teacher, and then that was what happened. So once we got the enrollment, we let those hires know next year you'll be teaching both fifth and sixth graders. I think that what happened is we ended up with, some kind of middle school teachers that were really rather wanting to be elementary teachers. And so that was a challenge. And this year for hiring, as an example, some of those teachers are going to be kind of going to our elementary model, which is kind of where their preference is. And we are kind of hiring this year because we have so much more time and we know we're becoming a full middle school. We're able to really intentionally hire for folks who love middle school. I just think as an educator, I really believe that to be a kindergarten teacher, you have to love teaching kindergarten. I think to be a really good middle school teacher, you have to love middle school kiddos. And so I'm just really excited because now we can kind of shift things around with staffing and make sure that, we have folks exactly where they are passionate and they have the skill sets to be really effective. So that was challenging last year. And then this year, I think has continued to be a little bit challenging, is that some of our teachers working with middle school students are like, would rather be kind of more on the elementary end. So.
And I think you actually, there's this one last question where it was like, are you looking for different sorts of teachers to staff the middle school grades? And I think you kind of tangentially answered that question where it's like, you're looking for people who really want to teach the middle grades. We're coming up on time here, but are there any other distinct differentiators that you're looking for in middle school as we round out the discussion?
For the folks, yeah. I mean, again, I just think a big passion, content knowledge, of course, becomes that much more important at that age. And then we are hiring like a full-time health teacher for our middle school next year to really attend to like the physical health, mental health, social health, because we've just seen as our kiddos are getting older, some, more different and unique things coming up as kids are going through puberty and like all the different ways the social dynamics can change. And so again, this idea of like, how do we invest our resources to make sure we're supporting students, not just academically, but on those other needs that we're seeing arise as well. So some of it is we weren't originally planning on hiring a full-time health teacher, but we definitely decided to put money in the budget for that for next year. And then again, just finding more like really experienced, passionate middle school educators, and making sure we put enough money aside in the budget to afford them, right? We don't want like a first year middle school teacher. I really wanted someone who has, I would think most of our teachers have at least 10 years. So I was really over it, and I knew they were going to be more expensive. So I made sure to put money aside to really, again, invest resources to make sure as we're continuing to build the middle school, we're really getting it right. Because I do feel like our elementary program is really strong. It's year 6 of it, but this is year 1 of the middle school and next year's year 2. So I was like, how do we kind of continue to build that and make sure we're getting it right?
Well, thank you so much, Cary. It's been a really rich, robust conversation. And I think that probably, I know as a matter of fact that the participants, I'm sure a number have taken away like really just insights from your expansion journey. So thank you all for participating. And Cary, you're like actively still leading your school. Yes. The school is still in session. And Cary just got back from a 3-day camping trip with
my upper school kids.
Did I get right? Yeah, so last night. So really appreciate you carving out, this 45 minutes to be with us. So thank you. Of
course. Thank you so much, Kathryn, and always happy to chat. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.